Does BlackRock really run the world from the shadows? You've probably seen the rumors online, people saying BlackRock secretly controls everything. But is any of it actually true? In today's video, we're breaking it all down. We'll look at what BlackRock really is, how it makes its money, and whether it actually influences other companies. And a little spoiler, it does, but not quite how you might think. And here's the twist, I'll tell you the real reason so many people believe that they're secretly in charge. So let's get into it now. Just open YouTube and search BlackRock. You'll find dozens of videos all repeating the same idea, that they control the world, that they're the masters of the universe, and that we're all slaves to their ruthless capitalism. And if you look at the views, they're far from small. We're talking hundreds of thousands, even millions. And that's not a coincidence, by the way. We'll get into why a bit later. But let's get straight to the point. Is all this true? Does BlackRock really run the world? Let's start by understanding what this company actually is and why many people are mistaken in thinking they have that kind of power. On paper, BlackRock is the largest asset manager on the planet. It manages around $10.7 trillion in financial products like investment funds and ETFs. But here's the first key detail. That money is not theirs. And it's not even owned by Larry Fink, their CEO and founder, who actually owns just about 0.27% of the company. He's well behind other asset managers like Vanguard, which holds 8.9%, or State Street with 4%. So whose money is it? It belongs to their clients, institutional investors like pension funds, insurance companies, or even ordinary people like you and I. What BlackRock does is manage that money. They take it and put it into funds that mostly replicate stock market indices. In other words, they buy small portions of many companies to mirror the index. That's where those famous ETFs come in, which can be either passively managed, which most of them are, or actively managed, where a team actively decides what to buy and sell. Now, if that money isn't theirs, how does BlackRock make money? Clearly, they're not doing it just for fun. The answer is simple: fees. That's their real business. About 80% of their income comes from charging fees to those investing in their funds. It doesn't matter if it's a low-cost ETF charging just 0.2% or an active fund with higher fees. The more money they manage, the more they earn. It's as straightforward as that. The rest of their income comes from two other sources. One is selling financial technology, especially their platform called Aladdin, which banks and asset managers use to analyze risks and manage investments. This accounts for around 10%. And lastly, advisory services to central banks, governments, and large corporations. This part is less than 9%, but it gets the most attention. After all, advising the Fed or the ECB while holding investments in almost all the major banks does raise a few eyebrows. Alright, fair enough, so they don't control the money, but why on earth do they show up in every single major company on the planet? And if they're not trying to control anything, why are they shareholders in Amazon, Coca-Cola, Tesla, and even companies you've never heard of? It's not out of any malicious intent, it's just down to maths. So why does BlackRock not rule the world? Let's not kid ourselves. When BlackRock offers advice, it can absolutely influence how a company operates, and it likely wants to have that influence. That can even extend to a company's values and ethics. But there's a big difference between having influence and ruling the world, or being the mastermind behind companies as different as Meta, Nestle, and Johnson & Johnson. In reality, the reason BlackRock shows up as a shareholder in so many companies is simple. It has to, because of how its business model works. It's not about a hunger for global domination. Let me explain. To offer index-linked products like funds that track the MSCI World, the DAX, or the S&P 500, BlackRock has to hold shares in the companies that make up those indices. That's the only way it can offer index-tracking ETFs or passive investment funds. And the more indices a company appears in, think for example the Magnificent Seven or the big tech giants, they're in loads of indices, the more shares BlackRock needs to buy to build all the ETFs it offers. That's why you'll often see them holding 6% or more of companies like Amazon, Tesla, or Microsoft. But it's not just BlackRock. Other asset managers like Vanguard and State Street appear alongside them for the same reason. In fact, take a look at the chart below. You'll see BlackRock isn't even usually the largest shareholder. Coca-Cola, for example, does have more than 4% owned by BlackRock, yes, but it's also heavily held by firms like Vanguard and State Street. In other words, when a company is added to an index, BlackRock buys shares in it. And when a company is removed, they sell those shares. And again, it's purely to be able to offer those passive investment products. But did you know that most of these firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and the like, generally have a policy of not getting involved in company boards? It's true. In fact, there was a rather interesting case where BlackRock accidentally ended up owning more than 20% of an Australian company called Monadelphous Group. This happened because of a routine quarterly index rebalancing. Now here's the twist. Under Australian regulation, once you go above a 19.9% stake, you're legally required to make a public takeover offer. Of course, BlackRock had no intention of doing that. They just wanted to hold the necessary shares to include the company in their ETFs. So much for control and influence, they didn't even realize they'd triggered a takeover threshold. Alright, so they're not the Illuminati, but then why does everyone listen to what Larry Fink says? How can a single letter from him influence CEOs, governments, and even entire markets? Let's take a look at the more public and more strategic side of BlackRock. Basically, it's more about marketing than anything else. For years, BlackRock made waves by promoting what they called ESG investing, focusing on climate change, ethical governance, gender equality, and other social causes. They even coined the term social capitalism to describe it. But over time, they've eased off that stance quite a bit. These days, they're more focused on issues like the looming demographic crisis and the pressure it will put on healthcare systems, or the ethical use of AI in business. Still, regardless of the cause of the moment, their investment approach hasn't changed much. They continue to hold shares in companies in the proportions needed to track major indices. For example, even at the height of their push for climate action, fossil fuel reduction, and energy transition, they were still invested in companies like Occidental Petroleum, ExxonMobil, and Chevron. How is that possible? Once again, it's because they had to be, to offer ETFs that mirror indices like the S&P 500 or the MSCI World. That said, let's not pretend they had zero influence. They did play a role in promoting ESG standards by creating ESG-themed indices. And as more sustainable indices appeared, companies that aligned with those standards had more chances of being included, which meant potentially more investment from BlackRock. Naturally, this pushed many firms to embrace ESG principles, or at least appear to, through greenwashing, which in practice is what most ended up doing. So yes, to some extent they were behind the whole green push. Just as now they're helping promote companies that are integrating AI into their operations by launching new thematic indices. But that's a far cry from saying Larry Fink is secretly running Amazon, Coca-Cola, or Inditex from behind the scenes. Nothing could be further from the truth. So if they don't control the world, but they are everywhere, should we be worried as investors? Or maybe it's the opposite. Could we actually use this to our advantage? Basically, does it really make sense to invest in index funds if, in the end, your money always ends up with these massive asset managers? The answer is yes, and I'm going to show you why. There are two main reasons why it makes sense. It's low cost with very small fees, and it's one of the best ways to reduce long-term risk. The most solid indices tend to grow steadily over time, especially if you're investing with a horizon of 7 to 9 years or more. And in the video description below, we've left a few examples of index ETFs that have proven to be strong over the years. And just to be clear, this isn't a sponsored mention of BlackRock or anything like that, and we haven't included any of their ETFs. So, long story short, no, BlackRock isn't some shadowy villain controlling the world from a secret cave. But they're not innocent either. Their business model, global presence, and public messaging do have influence, though not so much because of who they are, but more because of how we see them. It's easier for us to believe there's someone pulling the strings than to accept that the system is actually a messy tangle of competing interests with no one in full control. And if you found this helpful, we have another video on our channel explaining how to build your own index portfolio, which you can watch here. And with that being said, that will be all for today. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel for more content like this, and I will see you in the next video.